Thank you. Okay, boom. The Finance Committee meeting will be called to order at, I have 10:32 on Wednesday, February 16th. All members are present, that being Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderwoman O'Neill. The purpose of the Finance Committee is to handle all matters relating to the review of the budget and continuous surveillance of the budget. The Finance Committee shall have power to review and make recommendations with regard to the mayor's annual operating budget and shall submit recommendations with regard to the budget to the City Council not later than the second Monday in May of each year. The Finance Committee shall review all proposed amendments to Title VI, Revenue and Finance of this code. With that, could I have a motion for the approval of today's agenda?
Move to approve the second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Can I have a motion to approve the minutes as written for our meeting on February 2nd, 2022?
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Our first item on the agenda is a discussion that is in response to my colleague Alderwoman Finlayson's request of a 5-year analysis of the transit budget. I believe we have a late update on that request, if I'm not mistaken. Would Director Dickinson care to report on that?
Yes. Hello. So after the last meeting, you had asked for a 5-year look back on transportation activities. And I pulled together a high-level expenses and revenue summary. And and just to look at the net the transportation activities have created over the course of those 5 years. And I distributed it to you, Sheila, Alderwoman Finlayson. I'm sorry. I thought I had copied you. I copied somebody else that popped up when I typed her name. So that random person got a transportation activity summary, whoever it was. And I did attach it this morning to the email. And after I did this, Dr. Dua contacted me and said he thought that he wanted more detail than I had provided of the transportation activities. And I had done a very high level broad view of the entire transportation fund. So as we were talking about that, the city manager asked me to add some information about the parking garage and how much the parking garage might be able to contribute to the transportation activities after presuming there's no Hillman garage net revenues or downtown parking net revenues in that area that they're going to that the P3 would use. So I've started pulling that together, and I don't have all that information pulled together yet. And Dr. Dua and I are working on that together. So that's not all quite ready. The other day at the work session, I spoke to that. I talked about what I'm seeing on the Hillman garage and the sources that we would still take in from our other garages and other parking assets. And like I said, I don't have all the information about the other parking assets yet, so I can't make a conclusion on that, although we may have varies over the past few years, but anywhere between 500,000 and $1.5 million of other revenue to go to the transportation activities on top of the $1 million that the P3 is anticipated to provide. So like I said, I want to firm up those numbers before I distribute it again. And I just wanted to update you on where we were. And I don't know if Dr. Dua wants to add any more to that. He's on the call as well. If he has anything more to say about the 5-year information.
No, please.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
I'm looking at the document, Ms. Dickinson, and thank you for sending that to me or to us. I just want to be clear on what is in front of me. So you went back to 2017 and you indicated to us the expenses and the revenue. So what I am reading is that, and I don't recall whether COVID kicked in
20 in your fiscal year 20
in
is
fiscal
the first year, and you have got notes there to explain that as the pandemic kicked in and affected revenues, you see the subsidy that's coming from the parking fund increasing.
Excuse me, the public doesn't know what we're looking at. Is this something that we, sorry to interrupt, is this something that we can put on the screen while Alderwoman Finlayson goes through it?
Madam Chair, I'm not interested in having this become a public document until Ms. Dickinson has finished. I think she indicated that she's still working on it. So I would not want to disseminate. My questions are general. They're not generic, but they're general. So I can see, and I guess I'm reading this correctly, that there is definitely a decline in revenue because of COVID, which we should all have expected. And then we had a subsidy that would come in as a result of COVID that is taken into consideration. And there is revenue from, I assume, the general fund to make up any shortfall. And
not in those years, no.
In 19, 20?
No, in fiscal year 20, and 21, we used grant monies to supplant what was missing from this subsidy from the parking fund. We used grant monies. Some of it was the Transportation Cares Act money that came directly to them. And then in 21, we also used some of the ARPA funds to pay for the transportation activities. So that's in those notes. And the document that I sent to you originally, that's just factual information off of the financial statements. So there would be no reason why that couldn't be disseminated. It's the rest of it about the Hillman garage that's not ready. And it's attached to that same document that I have here. So the information I gave you is just giving you information from the financial statements.
So this could be attached to Granicus for anybody.
Yes, I mean, there's a couple of columns that aren't filled out, like my 22 projections and 23 projections aren't completed. But other than that, it's just historical information.
Okay. Okay, then I am fine. I just want to have a clear picture of what our expenses are and what the revenue has been, so that we can make sure there is adequate funding for transit going forward. You know, I think you all know that that is my interest here. And I feel like I couldn't put my hands around it all unless I knew what the costs were and what the trend is. You know, we know that the trend in transit is going down because of COVID. So we would expect the revenues to go down. And in this case, the expenses also, even though we were running routes probably on a limited basis, those expenses still went down considerably over those years. So anyway, I just wanted to have a clear picture of what those numbers look like and how we're meeting a balanced budget in transportation. So thank you, Ms. Dickinson, and I look forward to the garage data being provided.
So Director Dickinson, for purposes of the meeting minutes, how do we refer to this document that is a history of 2017 to well, at least 2017 to 2022? Can you help us out on?
I would just call it a summary of transportation activities.
Okay.
5 years.
Okay. And for the record, was met the requirements of Alderman Finlayson as far as the trending and projection from what we see only here.
Okay.
Right.
You have a raised hand.
Oh, I see you. Director Dua.
Yeah, just quickly, Jody, FY21, we are still using the second round of the CARES funds, which is just over $2 million. The upper funds are yet to be distributed. We don't have any grant agreement, so it's very likely the upper funds will be used in FY23. But for FY 2022, we still have the second round of the CARES fund, which is just about $2 million. So looking on the grant side, from now until more likely FY 2024, we are very good because of the infusion of money from the federal government through FTA. I did meet with MTA on Monday, and they also did indicate that we will get some money from the infrastructure bill through FTA. They have not made any determination as to how much the transit agencies in the state actually will be getting. So just to recap, FY21, we are still using the remaining portion of the CARE funds. If you do recall, we started using it in the quarter of FY 2020. And then we moved the rest to FY 2021. FY 2022, we have another $2 million or just over that in CARE funds. Remember, we got a total of about $4 million in CARE funds. And then we are using the upper funds in FY 2023 based upon the grant budget that we did for the FY 23 city budget. Just to clarify that.
First, number one, Takia, make sure you use the word preliminary. That was presented to us. And number two, I would suggest that the use of the ARPA funding be accounted for in sort of a separate document so we can explain where that went. I'm not sure how you're ultimately going to present that, Jody, Director Dickinson.
Okay, so I'll put an ARPA summary on this sheet when I'm done.
Okay.
Basically, I just used the ARPA funds in 21 to make sure the transportation fund expenses were covered. And going forward in 2022, if we need it, the first resource we're going to use is that CARES Act money that they still have. They didn't get permission to use the second half of the $4 million until FY 2022. So we have that for 22 and 23 to assist in paying for transportation activities. So that will definitely help. And then we would only go to ARPA if we don't, if the CARES funding won't cover the shortfall.
So just for background, the CARES allocation was two allocations, one to transit and one to the list of care, the list of care that we went to
this transportation got its own allocation of CARES Act money, and the total was 4.3 million, I believe. And they only allowed us to use half of that on the first round. So we could use half of that in FY20, which we did. We had, I think it was about 700,000. FY21, we used the rest of that allocation. And in FY22, they then gave us permission to access the other half for transportation. The other CARES Act money that we got on the general fund side helped with a lot of other COVID-related, yes, the whole list that we would provide of the efforts that we were doing in the community.
Okay. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, clarity on that point, Ms. Dickinson. We were allocated the $4.2 million. And in the first approval, we were given approval to use half of that. Is that correct? And then of that half, we used a portion in 20 and a portion in 21.
Yes.
Over 2 years. Okay. Because
Yes.
it sounded as if it sounded different. So anyway, I just wanted to be clear that there's still half of it waiting for approval.
For
to
use for
use
transportation
those funds.
activities,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you.
The other half has been approved, but we have not started to draw down on that for FY 2022. So what is going to happen is that starting Q3 of FY 2022, you will start drawing down the remaining portion of the CARES funds through FTA. As Jody did explain, the city did get some care funds through the county government, and transit also did get some care funds through FTA. So we are talking about the FTA, the funds from FTA, and we use a portion of it in 2020 and 2021. 2022, we also did get our traditional grants, large urban ADA and preventive maintenance. These traditional grants have fixed time limits in the fiscal year. So it is prudent for us to use those grants that have fixed expiration date. As of now, CARES funds through FTA has no deadlines. So we decided to use all the traditional grants as much as we can, and then we will shift to the remaining portion of the care funds, which is just over $2 million. So starting from Q3, I know for fixed route vehicle operation, we have exhausted all our traditional grants. So starting Q3 of this fiscal year, we will start drawing down on the care fund. The care funds can go for vehicle operations, can go for ADA, and can go for preventive maintenance. They are not allocated to specific type of transit activities. It's for transit in general. So that is there, and we will start drawing down on that starting from Q3.
Thank you.
Director Dua, so you basically are saying that you need to, to close the books on fiscal year 2022, you need to commit all of the federal dollars and the grants, et cetera, see what is left and use the appropriate care funding for that. Is that what I'm hearing?
So what happens is this: once we, for the traditional grants, there is a local match required. So we do that first. So whatever that is left that we don't have the traditional grants, since the care fund is 100% federally funded, normally we would take into account any revenues, fair revenues that come to transit. So at the end of the quarter, we take a look at all our expenses and take a look at any revenue directly generated through the fare box system. So what is left is your net operating deficits. And that amount will be covered with the remaining portion of the care funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Any other questions on this item? Alderwoman Finlayson, do you feel that we need to address it next meeting again?
Well, I'd just like to wait and hear from Ms. Dickinson when she brings back the additional data for the parking garages. But I'd like to ask if City Manager Gerald would like to add anything to what we've heard this morning.
No, I don't think so. I think it was covered well. You know, I think the important thing as we look towards Hillman Garage and the decrease in revenue from Hillman Garage is that there's going to be a pretty significant decrease in expenses too on a going forward basis as the responsibility for Hillman Garage transfers over to Amrp and premium parking. So there'll be a decrease in revenue, but also expenses. And so we'll want to account for that as best we can when we're doing these projections so that we truly look at not just the loss of revenue, but what the net loss of revenue is going to be.
Will that information be included, Ms. Dickinson, in what you're going to present later?
Yes, that's part of the second piece where I'm trying to isolate the revenue coming from Hillman currently and over time and the costs related to Hillman And then there's also those other parking assets that the P3 will be handling. So I need to know what came in from there and try to estimate some costs related to monitoring those parking spots. That's the part that's kind of difficult because it's not easily separated from my perspective. I only see the top level totals for the cost and for the revenue. So all of the parking space revenue is in one account in the general ledger. So that's what Dr. Duo is helping me with. He's helping me isolate what revenues are for which spots because they have more access to that information.
I don't mean to belabor this, but does SP Plus break down the data between those people who have monthly, annual, I want to say subscriptions. I know that's not the right term, but between those people who pay monthly, annually, and those people who come in and out of the garage on a one-time or irregular time period? Does that make sense?
You want me to chime in? I did look at the SP Plus data. On the revenue side, there is a separation between the monthly parkers and what they call the transient, those who come in one time and park. So there is, but it's so much information. The structure is such that it's not easy to download to analyze. So I have to go through each line, understand the expenditures, and then get a summary. So that's what I'm working on now for Director Dickinson. Hopefully, early next week, I will be able to get everything for her. I did send her some information on the Tillman parking garage, but given the work involved, I did inform him that it may take some time for me to finish that.
Could we not ask SP Plus to analyze this data and provide us with what we need?
We can. I will send out the request and see the response.
I mean, instead of you trying to cull through their data, it might be easier if they just tell us what we need to know. But maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
No, that's a good idea. If you don't ask, you don't know what you're going to get, right?
So, thank you.
All right.
Mr. City Manager, I just want to clarify what you said, which is a really valid point, a very interesting point, that as we move forward, the cost of, I guess, operations and maintenance will be less, and that will be addressed in our net revenue. Is that what you're saying as we have a new operator, without, expanding on it? Is that what you said?
Yeah, we should not just subtract the total revenue and say that's going to be the impact on the transit system, because it really is the net revenue, right? So it's the revenues minus the decrease in expenses that we'll have to make up for. So yeah, it's the net revenue that matters.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. Okay, any other questions?
Sorry, just one more comment regarding the information that Dr. Dickinson did provide for the transportation fund. I think one of the comments I made to her is that the department under the transportation fund, basically there are about 3 or 4 core functions. And in our budget, we have a separate budget for administration, for vehicle operations, for preventive maintenance. And I believe there is one other item, which is from finance, transportation, other, which has the city overhead charges. So looking at transit, whatever that number you see here is not only for transit. We do transportation planning here. We provide oversight for the parking contract and stuff like that. But there are 2 budgets that are directly transit. These are the vehicle operations budget or expenses and the preventive maintenance. So if we are looking at transit, at least we do have information on how much the actual transit operation costs before we add any administrative charges or overhead charges to that. And within that, you'll be able to actually look at various cost elements that have been changing over time. That's just a comment on what she did provide. It's for the whole department, which includes transit. So whatever that you see here is not solely for transit.
Okay.
As I mentioned that my analysis was a very top level view, total cost for everything. And so the amounts that I gave can be broken down by the various operating units that he has there.
And I trust we'll get into that when we review the budget and the respective transfer of funds from transportation. I mean, from parking ultimately to transportation, and see where it's allocated accordingly. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on this item?
Just one more comment, sorry. Talking about transfer from parking to transportation,
Yes.
just FYI, there is no federal or state requirements regarding the grant that we must take the money from parking revenue. Generally, in the grant agreements, what the Fed and the state asks is that you need to determine a reliable, sustainable source of revenue for your local share. So that is an option the city actually has been using for a long time, but it is not a requirement that we must get the money from the parking fund.
Okay, I just want to protect the definition of the off-street parking, you know, being an enterprise fund, that part of it, that's, okay. All right, anything else, Director Dua? We're good? We're good.
No, please, we are good.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The next item is the review of ordinances. The first one being 040-21, the capital budget and capital improvement program. You may have noticed that I introduced a preamble to our meeting, and I intend on doing that every meeting. And I did that because of receipt of some of the testimony that we received on this ordinance that assumed that we were going to speak of planning and zoning requirements and sort of more of a comprehensive review. And I just want the public to know that we look at these ordinances through a financial lens and that other concerns will be addressed in other committees. I know specifically on 040-21, it was reviewed by the Planning Commission already, and it will be reviewed by Environmental and Transportation. With this, I understand, and Takia can correct me, that we do have testimony, formal testimony from the Eastport Civic Association, a letter signed by Bill Reichard, and that was submitted formally. And then we have formal testimony submitted by Jake Iverson, who is the new operator of watermarks. I don't have anything else as far as testimony. Is that correct, Takia?
Yeah,
Hi.
yes, I don't have anything else. I also don't have Jake Iverson, so if you could send that to me, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, he submitted on the City Council public, actually, yeah, select meeting. He selected the Finance Committee, but he did submit it using the City Council public comment web form.
Okay, then I can get that.
I think you can find it, yeah. Do my colleagues have that testimony? Yeah.
Did he not present it on Monday night?
Bill did, yes. It's the same testimony.
Didn't both of them? No, I thought both of them spoke.
Oh, correct. Yeah, I don't know if Jake said, like, recited it the same as Bill did. But.
It was pretty close what Jake recited, because when I read it, I looked through it. It was talking about statistics on water taxi.
Before we dive into it, I did ask the city manager, and on the Appendix A, the sheet from the capital budget, that was my first question, was that in line? If we could all look at that which is a summary of.
I'm happy to walk through that if you.
Yeah, if my colleagues don't mind, if we could at least look through the documentation, and the first one being this
Sure.
attachment, which basically is what we are looking at as far as
Right.
proving.
So by way of clarification, the intent of this legislation is to add this project to the CIP. So some of the concerns about meeting all of the planning and zoning requirements, like any other CIP project, this will have to meet all those. This doesn't waive all those requirements by approving this. This just approves the funding. So the way this is laid out is in the first year, and the reason why we wanted to get this into the CIP instead of waiting for the normal cycle of doing it when we submit the budget is because the electric ferry is a long lead time item. So we wanted to have funding to get that on order, because it's at least an 18-month for all of these, whoever we buy it from, all these electric boats are at least an 18-month lead time. So we wanted to place that order. So the way this is laid out is for the first year, the current fiscal year, we're going to set aside $100,000 to start the infrastructure planning and really developing concepts for what that's going to look like, what's going to be needed to support the electric ferry on both sides of the creek, and what other infrastructure will be required for the electric carts that are part of this. So this envisions 3 separate sort of subsystems all working together. The first, it will be the circulator. The circulator that we currently have will be made as an electric bus instead of the current buses that we use. So that's the first part of it. The acquisition of that electric circulator is included in the FY23 equipment acquisition number, if you're looking at Appendix A. The second part is the electric carts. The acquisition of those is also included in that FY23. That will be a couple of those. It'll be 1 circulator backed up by the conventional circulator buses, and then a couple of the electric carts, since we don't have a backup for those. The $330,000 that's shown equipment acquisition for this year is what I mentioned for the electric ferry. That's the cost estimate for that. And then $100,000 for the planning. We don't know what the cost is going to be for either the design or construction, because frankly, we don't know what those requirements are going to be yet. That's why we need to do that planning starting in FY20 this year, FY22. And then that will inform what those costs are, as well as what the scope of the work will be for the infrastructure pieces. So that's the way this is all laid out. We anticipate that for this first year, that we'll use our capital reserve money for the planning effort, for the $30,000 down payment for the electric ferry, and then for the city overhead costs. So that's a total of $151,500. The rest of it we're getting commitments from BGE, the county, and the state to pay the rest of that $300,000. We're going to seek further grants for next year for the acquisition of the equipment for the electric carts and the electric circulator. So we're working on that. And then we'll have to determine how much money we need in 24 for the construction effort, design and construction for the infrastructure. So that's the way this is laid out. Happy to answer any questions. Again, this will have to go through the full process, through planning and zoning, through public works, to get all of this done over the next several years.
Ellie, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm muted because my paper shuffling. Thank you, City Manager. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, Mr. Gerald, can you show me? I'm reading through the document, and I'm not seeing where the circulator cost is being indicated. It says $550,000.
Right.
Where is that in the cost breakdown?
Sure, that's part of the FY23, $1 million for equipment acquisition.
Okay,
So that's a portion of it. And then the rest of it, of that $1 million, is for the 2 electric carts.
okay. So am I misreading that, or is that somewhere in here?
It's
Because
in
if
the
I'm not
second
saying,
paragraph. Yes, in
Yeah,
the
that's
second
where I am.
paragraph of the project description. So it says that the project cost includes $330,000 for an electric boat, $100,000 for planning and conceptual design in FY22, $550,000 for an electric circulator bus, and $50,000 for 2 electric 6-passenger vans, plus $400,000 for charging infrastructure.
and
in
I
FY23.
I'm sorry, and I read that. I think it just might be helpful to indicate that that's part of that $1 million under the equipment acquisition for 2023.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Because-
what that's for. So it's
Yeah,
the 550 plus 100,000 for the 2, and then 400,000.
okay,
It actually is 50,000 for both of them. So that's how it gets to the $1 million.
so the 50,000 for the 2,
550 plus 50 plus 400. Yeah.
Okay. I just think that would be helpful because I was trying to figure out where we were paying for those and I didn't know what that $1 million. So anyway, that's helpful to me. Thank you. My other question has to do with the 5th Street docking upgrade. We're getting ready to go into the planning phase of this this year, but it sounds like some planning has been done because it's indicating that it's going to go to 5th Street. You know, that's going to be the other docking station. So where was the preliminary research indicating that's the best spot, not 4th Street or 3rd Street or I don't know, any other street?
So you're right. So that was the mayor's concept, was it would use that street end park there that's very much in need of development. So there wasn't a study that went into that. What the study, the $100,000 study, is going to do is look at that area and determine what needs to be done to make it able to accommodate an electric ferry, as well as accommodate the people that would need parking there as well. The concept is that the parking would be remote from there, and then the electric carts would get people to that location. But there has to be infrastructure to even do that, to turn around and to temporarily stage there and perhaps even to charge there, although that wouldn't be the ideal place to charge the electric carts. But all of that needs to be looked into. But that location was determined by the mayor, and now we're going to study what needs to be done to use it for that purpose.
So does that mean that the planners, whomever is going to be, I guess, hired to do this, will have some other options if they, you know, start the research and find this might not be the best location? Maybe, you know, I don't know. Will they have that option if there are other considerations, I guess?
Yeah, so what to look at first is if that's feasible to use as a location. If it's not feasible, then we'll have to look at other options. But their first order of business will be determined if that's a feasible location.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. So I have a question. Ooh, sorry. I seem to be echoing. Sorry. So I have a question about this as a whole and whether we pass it as a whole, given the fact that Watermark has also proposed to green their fleets. I'm not sure the city is prepared to be ferry dock operators. I mean, certainly the electric circulator and The electric carts are something that we can handle with our current staff, I would guess. There's a whole lot more that goes into operating a ferry than just buying the ferry and finding a dock for it. There's hiring and training of captains and keeping up with the licensing. And is there a possibility that this could be forwarded, taken apart? And is that something that we should be looking at prior to pushing it forward to the council?
So I can answer that if you'd like, Chairwoman.
Yes, City Manager,
Thank you.
please.
Yeah, so we've already had meetings with Watermark. We anticipated they would be the operator despite what was said on Monday. We have had meetings with them and they would be the operator for the electric ferry along with their other things. The city doesn't have that expertise. They do. They also want to green up the rest of their fleet. So this would kind of fit into that whole move, but we've had at least initial discussions with them about being the operator for this. So again, that was the previous owner, so she hasn't weighed in since she's gone now, but we did meet with her and they are, at least she was very interested in participating in this as a partner in this venture.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Just broadly looking at the attachment, these numbers would go into the fiscal year 2022 budget, so they're pretty real, I assume. So what is the equipment acquisition specifically for? I'm trying to align this with the staff report and the fiscal report, and I can't.
Okay, let me walk through that one more time. So
Please.
The equipment acquisition in FY22, the $330,000 is for the electric ferry. That's the long lead time item. So it's a $30,000 down payment with $300,000 due when it's delivered. So that's the 330. The equipment acquisition for FY23 is for one electric circulator bus that's $550,000. It's for two electric 6-passenger vans for a total of $50,000. And then it's for $400,000 of charging equipment for the ferry and for the electric circulator and buses. So that's the total of $1 million in FY23. Mm-hmm. So the way the CIP works is that if this is passed, the only funding that's approved, that's appropriated is the FY22. This will have to be in the FY23 with all of the numbers moved to the left, right, for approval of the FY23. And then 24 will be approved when FY24 rolls around.
Yeah, I think it's important for the public to know that fiscal year 2023 is not really, I don't want to say subject to change, but it is, if that's my understanding.
It's not appropriated, right?
Yeah, correct. And the city overhead is?
Yeah, so that's the 5% that we charge on all CIP projects carried out by the city.
We're making a down payment of $30,000 for this equipment, this thing. What are the terms of that down payment? Will we get the money back if it doesn't work out? Shipping problems. I'm not sure how we're getting it over here. Isn't it coming from overseas?
Well, we have to look into that because there's issues with buying one overseas. So we're looking at other manufacturers as well. So there's been no order placed and there's been no final decision on where that's going to be purchased from.
Alderman Finlayson, and then I'll get to you, Alderman Arnett. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, my lips are moving and nothing's coming out right. Mr. Jarrell, looking at the 330,000, I think I heard you say that this is at least an 18-month leeway process, we need a $30,000 deposit. Why is the other $300,000 in fiscal 22 when we know that it's not going to be delivered probably before, 23, if not 24?
Because you have to have that money in the bank basically in order to place the order. You can't place an order with just $30,000 for a $330,000 item. So it's same with our construction projects. So we approve them in a year, and some of these longer ones don't actually expend all the money for several years, but you still have to have the money up front to award the construction contract. So it's the same situation here. In order to place the order, you have to have the full amount of money available with certainty.
I guess I'm just confused about the timeline. We're almost at the end of 22, are we not? So in July, we have 23. I'm not clear why that wouldn't be in, the 300 wouldn't be in 23. But you know.
Yeah, so for things like this, the appropriation can't be based on the actual expenditures. It has to be available when you award the contract or award the agreement. You've got to have all the money up front, and Director Dickinson is going to weigh in on this as well, but you have to have the money up front in order to be able to be certain you can continue with the effort.
Yeah, and that's basically what I was going to add. I agree with everything you said. We don't allow purchase orders to be issued unless we know we have legal appropriations for the purchase. So if we were to just put 30 in this year and issue a purchase order, and in the June budget process, the council decided not to appropriate the rest of the 300, then we'd have an electric ferry on order and no money to pay it with. So we've got to have a legal budget appropriation before we issue a purchase order.
I guess for some reason I thought if it was in our CIP, then we would be good. You know, even if we put it in now, the council could still come back in July or June and take it out.
Not if we've already committed to a purchase. Yeah, if we've committed to a purchase from a vendor, we couldn't pull the funding away. So, you know, it.
And I wasn't suggesting that. I wasn't suggesting that.
I know. I know.
Okay.
And the only thing that's legally appropriated in the CIP is the current year budget. The rest of it that's shown in that capital improvement program are not yet legally appropriated.
Okay. My other question has to do with the 451 for 22. So that's coming out of the contingency fund? Is that what I understood? That's the bottom line for 22.
So 151,500 is coming out of our capital reserve fund, the funds that are available for capital projects.
And then the 300 is coming from grants from the BG&E county, federal, state bodies.
State, county, and BGE.
Yeah, I was reading it in the notes. Okay, thank you. Just need a clarification.
But one question before I get you, Alderman Arnett. Design, to my colleague's point, meanwhile, we are designing something, and you know, to prevent the cart before the horse here, and also to appease some of the public's concern that we've heard as far as the infrastructure and the Fifth Street stuff. We don't know yet, right, until we have this design done. Or just to be more specific, it sounds like the mayor has directed a design to see if this works on the end of Fifth Street. I don't want to get out of the purview of the finance committee, but I just don't want to commit money when the design is in flux as well. And so I guess you're saying, is it safe just to buy this boat, not really knowing where the infrastructure is and et cetera? I hate to do something before.
Yes, I prefer to call it planning because the detailed design is going to start later. So what we need to do first is really the planning and then sort of development of concepts on what's going to be required to support this service. So that will start. That's going to take some time, as you know very well.
Yeah.
Those planning efforts take some time. So what we really wanted to do is get ahead on two things. One is to get started with the planning, because otherwise we would just wait until 23, but to get started with that planning that needs to be done, but also start the acquisition of the boat, because that's a long lead time item that's going to come later. So that was the thought process that went into laying it out the way it's laid out.
So that's smart to address the long lead item ahead of time. Sorry, Alderwoman O'Neill.
I had a quick question going back to Sheila's or Alderwoman Finlayson's question about the grants. And those are grants that we have secured or that we hope to secure?
That we are in the process of securing. So we've got some commitments, but we don't have the money in hand. So it's sort of between your description. So it's more than just that we hope. We have verbal commitments, but we haven't received the money yet.
Okay, thank you.
So this is an ordinance. It's not a purchase order. Will the purchase order come before us in a different format, or is this ordinance approve the purchase order?
Yeah, you don't get purchase orders.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Right.
Yeah, so you approve the budget, you appropriate the money, and then we do the purchase orders and the contracts.
Just so that we're all clear. Okay, Alderman Arnett, I apologize.
Thank you. No problem, Madam Chair. Just two quick points of information for the committee's benefit. Just last evening, the mayor and the port wardens had a very good dialogue, and they raised several of the points that the committee members are speaking to. So if you have the opportunity, I think it would be worth looking at that video. One of the points that came up was Jake Iverson noted that Watermark already has 2 operating electric water taxis, and he offered to take the mayor and others out for a trial run on those. The port wardens were suggesting that we try out these routes, including the boat that you're looking at in the CIP ran aground at 5th Street. So I think there's some other issues that need to be figured out. But the other point, Alderwoman Finlayson was questioning 5th Street. 5th Street is also where the fire department parks its trucks when they come down to take the fireboat out on routine runs. And so I think there's going to be some complications with 5th Street having other city uses going on that could get in the way. Not to say that 5th Street shouldn't still be the site for the ferry, but it's not just free all the time. The fire trucks park there for the entire time that they're out on the fireboat.
I think that's something that planning and zoning will have to look at. I'm surprised. I read the staff report from the Planning Commission, and they didn't speak to anything like that, which is interesting. I thought they'd be more thorough, as they usually are. Thank you, Alderman Arnett. Alderwoman O'Neill, are you satisfied with your answer as far as, I guess the word I could use is feasibility between the city running this versus Watermarks, or is this, a joint effort? I'll have you address that.
I will say I'm mostly satisfied. I worry that we're putting this in and there is no discussion about a partnership, whether it be through Watermark or other, that the city is seeking partnership for the operating of the boats. And also, I don't know if it's probably not appropriate, but the operating costs that are involved with the boat, have we done a feasibility study on exactly what the costs are going forward? So in fiscal 23, we're looking at this cost, but down the roads, what are the costs associated with not only the build outs of that dock and the landing dock on the other side of the creek, but then the operating, and how will that work between, if it's a partnership between us and business that is operating the vehicles, are we going to be in charge of maintenance and staffing? That was a long-winded, I'm not sure if I'm.
No, question to Director Dickinson, would a feasibility study be something that we could do internally, or is that something we'd have to outsource?
So probably for the, to try to guess the, estimate the operation of an electric boat, I would not have that expertise. And that might be something that's done during the planning process as well, to look and see what the operating cost of the boat is, or if we're gonna lease it out or lease the operations to another entity to do the operations. So yes, I would not have the expertise to do that. I'd have to do some research.
Well, let me ask this. The $100,000 is assumed to cover planning. Planning, could that be hand in hand with the feasibility study? Kind of a comprehensive look at this?
It would be part of that. That's what the anticipation was, and that was for a consultant as well. So it wasn't $100,000. It's to hire a consultant to do that.
Okay. Could we ask inevitably that the Finance Committee get a copy of that when it's done? Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I guess furthermore, would then this fall under transit, going back to Alderwoman Finlayson's insurance that our transit continues to be funded? I would guess that this adds to that funding of transit.
I would think so. Yeah, that's where this would reside, is in part of the Transportation Department.
Thank you.
To my colleagues, do we want to make any motions for any further requests or anything else? Otherwise, I would ask for a motion for favorable recommendation to proceed with the equipment acquisition due to the long lead item and the concurrent planning, subject to final planning of the infrastructure we can't address. Sorry, City Attorney.
Ma'am, you have before you 04021. So the motion has to be to recommend favorably or unfavorably. The details and specifics that you're discussing are different than what you have before you. So you want to be careful what you're approving. You're either recommending this for favorable or not in whole. If you want to take it apart, then that's a different thing, and you need an agenda to do that. Because your agenda right now is, are you recommending favorably on 04021 as you have it before you and as you discussed it?
Okay.
If you want to take it apart, that's fine, but you need to figure out what your motion is, and it's
right.
This or several things.
I can't move on my stream of consciousness or thought process.
No, ma'am.
No, that could be dangerous. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes. I'm not sure that we're ready to make a decision. I think we all embrace the idea, but there's just too many questions. With the recent comment, the last comment about the additional costs to transportation, i.e. transit, that concerns me because I'm concerned about how we're going to pay for what we have. And now we're adding something new that will also be an additional cost. And what will that be exactly on an ongoing basis? Alderwoman O'Neill brought up an excellent point, and I know Mr. Lyles has just said that this has to be taken in total, but why wouldn't there be an option to make this 3 different projects, or at least 2 different projects? Mr. Lyles, you're not going to shut me up. I'm sorry. I'm going to say, because we're still in discussion. So we're good, but so I don't know, Mr. Gerald, what happens if we don't give this a favorable? I know you need the money moved, and that's really what this is all about. So you can get started on the ordering of the boat, and I guess the circulator also, I guess everything. But I mean, what happens if we don't give a favorable recommendation?
Well, if 04021 doesn't get passed, then we don't move forward with the project. I mean, it's really that simple. In order for us to move forward and start the planning and order the electric ferry, we need to have this approved. And if it doesn't, I guess we'll try again in the FY23 CIP budget. But yeah, I mean, that's the implication, is that we won't move forward with this project at all.
Well, I mean, the FY23 budget discussions begin in 2 months, right?
Right, but the approval of the CIP isn't until June. So the thought was that we would get ahead of that. And we introduced this at the beginning of January. This was the mayor's first bill introduced. I guess it was must have been last year after the election. But yeah, I mean, it would push it back to being reconsidered again as part of the FY23 budget.
Well, isn't there a possibility to push this back a month for our consideration? Do you think 30 days would have an impact so that it would halt it? Why couldn't this be ordered in 30 days instead of this month?
I'm sorry. What I answered is if you decide not to move forward with this project at all, what the implication was. Yeah, clearly, if you just delay it a month, then it just pushes back the planning and acquisition and all of those things a month.
Okay, so it wouldn't kill it, because I don't think that's our interest at all. At least it's not mine.
It absolutely wouldn't. It would only kill it if the council doesn't pass this ultimately. And even then, it might not kill it and just might push it back to being reconsidered as part of the FY23 CIP.
Well, I guess I would propose, Madam Chair, that we postpone action until our next meeting, so that we have an opportunity to get some of our questions answered. That's my proposal, and that'll be a motion if you'd like.
Can we define what your questions may be? Because obviously there's some unknowns here that we're going to have a difficult time, because we really need to do this planning effort to answer a lot of the questions that Alderwoman O'Neill and that you have asked. So I'm not sure we're going to have those ready in a month from now, honestly.
Well, most recently, my question is what is the additional cost to transit going to be?
We won't know that.
But we don't know how much it's going to cost to operate these electric boats?
And the electric circulator and the electric trolleys, no, we do not know that right now.
Well, surely someone has used these mechanisms somewhere where there's some sort of a track record of their success or their operations. But that would be one question for me. The other would be the benefit, and going back to Alderwoman O'Neill's question, to dividing it into two different CIPs. Is there a benefit to doing it that way? So those are just two questions that just come to my mind right now that I would like answered. And, maybe the timeline isn't right. I don't know.
Could we, I don't know if that's a motion, no, it's not on the floor yet, but we would propose a motion to postpone and we can summarize, I think now, some of our concerns. I know one of them basically being the feasibility of this and whether we really do have, I'm a little bit concerned about the watermarks part of this. The fact that his testimony came in as late as Monday night, it doesn't sound like he's in agreement that he's been approached to work together on this. And that's basically what his written testimony implies. Yes, City Attorney.
Madam Chair, The Office of Law is not trying to curtail any deliberations here. We're trying to help you put forth a motion that is clear and concise and is actually what the committee wants, as opposed to a stream of language that doesn't get you to a motion, right? So you can do whatever you want to do. I'm just trying to help you get to a motion that tells the public what you want.
Sure. No, I understand that. I'm just trying to frame the questions, and I'm going to look at my colleagues for help there.
The only other thing is here, you must be careful, since the council does not do procurement and contracts, to indicate a bias towards one provider or another in a potential contract. You must be very careful here when you discuss that, because that is not in the purview of the legislative branch. It is in the purview of the executive branch to determine the best value for the city. Any discussion about a potential procurement partner could provide some legal traps for the unwary.
So
just to caution you there.
Understood. So but it's fair to say that this ordinance is based on the city operating this.
I don't know, because that's entirely up to the city manager and the mayor, the staff.
Okay. I don't know who was first.
Ms. Green has her hand up.
Yes. Ms. Green?
I just wanted to say that you guys actually do have a motion on the floor, and it's to postpone until the next Finance Committee meeting. It hasn't been seconded yet, though.
Okay, I thought that was an informal ask of Alderwoman Finlayson to see if I would accept the motion. So do you want to rephrase your motion, Alderwoman Finlayson?
No, Ms. Green was fine. She said, she just repeated it. I'll repeat it again, to postpone action until the next meeting so that we can gather additional information to answer our questions.
That's a good.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay. Keep it general. Okay. All in favor?
Do we need to say more specifically? I've given my concerns, my questions that I'd like answered for the next meeting as best as we can. So do we have to give Mr. Gerald some more, or Ms. Dickinson some additional questions?
Alderman O'Neill, do you have a question before I turn to the city manager?
I would just say that if we were giving a list of questions to have answers to prior to our next meeting, I would say that one of my questions was if there could be written in there that the city intends to partner with an outside agency, unnamed agency, in the operation of the vessel, the boat. And that I would like to have the opportunity to see if it was possible to change this ordinance into its separate parts, the things that the city would be managing versus the parts that the city would be outsourcing for management.
Mr. City Manager, can you accept those questions from us?
Yes.
Can I add one that the planning in the capital budget summary that the planning incorporates a feasibility study? And just that correction be made, planning/feasibility. Okay. All right, I think we're concluded on this. Thank you. It was a very good discussion. Thank you. The next, I'll just do a time check here. I'm assuming we have a hard stop, but Takia, what is our time frame? 21.
I checked before you started.
We should be okay. We should be
fine
able
to
to
go
try
over 12:30 if you need to.
Yeah, but I know we all have other meetings today, so we'll try to keep this within the 2 hours. The next is the Fire Prevention Code 01-22. Let me just start by just summarizing where we're at. This was brought up at the last meeting because there really was no other opportunity for my colleague Alderman Arnett to bring up his concerns. I know this is going before just finance and economic matters and public safety actually today. I've allowed him to have his questions addressed today. He did send an email, but he can address those. The staff that will answer his questions, I believe, are all here. So why don't do you agree, my colleagues, that we'll start off with addressing our colleagues' concerns? Okay, Alderman Arnett, you basically have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that consideration and courtesy. I have sent you all a one-pager that points to various parts of the legislation that, in fact, are neither specific to the sprinkler revolving fund nor the Finance Committee, as you've set it out, Madam Chair. And I understand the Finance Committee's desire to focus on things that are analysis of things financial and budget. And so I can make this, I think, very short. I find myself in a position where I am not on any of the three committees this is going to, but I also have a lot of questions that are very substantive into, I don't have an objection to the wording change. I want to know why it's changed. I am very concerned about the change to the inspections. I'm very concerned about the change to eliminate the revolving fund for the electric. That was done in tandem with the revolving fund for sprinklers for downtown buildings because of the knob and tube wiring. And at the time, the whole push for this was that we get the use of the second and third floors on Main Street, Maryland Avenue, and elsewhere downtown. But since we have the city attorney, perhaps my concerns are best addressed by making an appointment to sit down with the Office of Law and go into page by page, line by line, why did this change? Rather than taking up the time of this committee, again, I can do this also at environmental matters or at public safety, but my general question to the sponsor, which is you and also Alderwoman Pendle Charles, was it your intent in this legislation, which was to do with changing the rules on sprinkler revolving fund, to make all of these other changes to Title 17? And if it is, then a conversation with you two is in order. But again, that might be better managed without taking up the time of this committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Arnett. I don't think it will take much time. As you know, the last meeting, we didn't have Chief Romali here to speak to specifically what's included in the NFPA regulations. And just for background, the way I understood the approach, being the sponsor, was, okay, what's the objective? We want to incorporate sprinkler system in such and such area. Okay, what do we have here? Does everything else still apply? Well, what doesn't apply? What's obsolete? And so in so doing, the subsequent revisions. But I'd like to just address your concerns, line by line, because they're valid concerns. And I don't know where else they can be addressed. And I'm giving you liberty here, even though it is the Finance Committee. Some of them do involve the revolving fund. But I just want to make sure that you understand about the. I have your email in front of me. If you don't mind, we could.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so let's
go through that.
Okay.
So on page 4. There is an amendment that makes the inspections, as I understand the language, not include single-family dwellings or two-family dwellings. Yet elsewhere, we require when there's a major modification, renovation to a home, that they install sprinklers. And my concern is, I don't understand why we're deleting that. The way it read originally, it says per allowed by state code. I'm assuming we're allowed by state code to inspect sprinkler systems that we're requiring to be installed in single family, multifamily dwelling units. So I think that's a pretty big change.
Okay. I've asked, another background is that when this ordinance was drafted, all department heads related were around a table discussing this. So I've asked that sort of regrouping here is, I think, if I may, with your permission, city manager, have John Manasseh speak to that, or because it's regarding inspections? I believe he's on the call. There he is.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question of Alderman Arnett while we're waiting?
Yes.
On page 4, are you referring to the strikeouts on lines 21 through 24?
Actually, I was looking at up at lines 3 and 4. Let's see, 21 and 24. I think there was others on page 4, but I was up at lines 3 and 4.
Okay, I just want to be clear on where we are. Thank you.
Just deleting a paragraph there. John, are you able to respond to his concern about deleting, quote unquote, deleting inspections of all buildings and structures, which is what it looks like?
Madam Chairwoman, I can respond. I still would like to say that the fire chief may be the appropriate person.
Oh. Okay.
But you know, that's up to you. If you want me to respond, I can.
Actually, yeah, why don't we backpedal? Backpedal is the wrong word. Backpedal. Back to the approach with this legislation, which is what I think Alderman Arnett needs to hear. And I think Chief Romali is the best to speak to that. If I may, City Manager, have Chief Romali address the approach to this legislation and how it protects all of our structures and buildings, either elsewhere in the code or here.
So I believe the legislation actually it's come out through the years. As all of you know, well, especially for me, I'm born and raised here in the city of Annapolis, so we've had several major fires throughout my lifetime. Dates back to Chicken Roost fire with the Chicken Roost in the inn on top, Fran O'Brien's, the India Palace at the top of Main Street, where we lost basically a block of Main Street, which was empty for quite a long time. Businesses were out, and then Zachary Jewelers and the area on the bottom of Main Street. So those major fires, and after every major fire, they come to the fire department, and they also go to the planning and zoning or the building department and say, what can we do to maintain our historic structures in the city of Annapolis? I'm going to tell you that sprinkler systems are the best option, but they're not the cure-all. I can't tell you we're not going to have a fire in a building downtown. We are going to have fires in buildings. It's going to occur. It's human nature. It's going to occur, but it's going to assist us with preventing life and property, preventing damage and saving lives. So this legislation has come from multiple groups, because after every major fire, they put a committee together. They come up with recommendations. It's going on through the years. And then when I became fire chief, we had the fire on Duke of Gloucester Street. They asked about the historic district. So, you know, it always seems to come up. It came up after the yacht club fire. But basically, this has been in motion for quite a while. I was not part of drafting this legislation. This was drafted under Chief Stokes, and it was done under a former city manager and city attorney. It's my understanding that this is accomplishing two things. Your goal is to sprinkler buildings on Main Street and Francis Street. So that's what the goal of the legislation was. But the former city manager and city attorney also was big on making the city code consistent with what we're doing and also clear for people to read. And I think that that's the part where you're seeing the strikeouts here that came from the law office at the time. We have reviewed it. Our fire protection engineers on here, Chuck Roos on here with us, also Deputy Chief Spriggs and Chief Ortley, who's the chief of the fire marshal's office. We have reviewed this. The NFPA code, the NFPA standards that we adopt early on in this code allow us to do these inspections. So taking the inspections out that Alderman Arnett is talking about is already covered under what we have adopted in NFPA. As for the single family and multifamily dwellings, Chief Manasseh is right. That typically occurs during the permit process. So during the permit process, we have the ability to go in with the building inspectors and do those inspections. Most of those inspections in a residential structure actually fall under the plumbing inspector when it comes to the sprinklers, but we're there, we assist with the calculations. Smoke detectors actually fall under the electrical inspector in that aspect of it. So in single family dwellings, we don't have a lot of room. We don't go back afterwards. It's people's castles. The code doesn't allow us to go into single family dwellings unless it's during the permit process or after an emergency, we can go in. Now, people call us and ask us to do voluntary inspections. We do that. But as for normal single family dwellings, we don't have that authority to do it now. During the permit process, we do, but after the permit process, we don't have the authority to go back in. Now, Chief Manasseh can tell you about rental properties because they have a lot more under the code. They're allowed to go in and inspect rental properties on a yearly basis and things like that. So that gets us into those areas there. But as for the strike-throughs, we've gone through this again, and we do not believe that it takes away any current inspections that we're currently doing, Alderman. It doesn't. It does fall under NFPA, the Life Safety Code 101 and NFPA 1 that gives us the authority to do these inspections. And I think they were just trying to not duplicate it. Typically what happens is because we adopt the State Fire Prevention Code, which is promulgated through State Fire Prevention Commission, and it relates to NFPA 1, which is the Fire Safety Code, and then 101, which is the Life Safety Code. The city code went into areas where we wanted to be more restrictive, and that's where we added stuff to our fire code. But that's where it stands currently. So I think two things are happening here. It's not only the sprinklers that you want to put in on Main Street and Francis Street, it's the just updating the code to make it a little more user-friendly, and the law office would have to give us more guidance on that. But during our review, we do not believe that it's taking away any of our current authority.
Madam Chair, this is very helpful, but can I ask a follow-on question, please? So this is Title 17, and it's Title 1720, and it's a Uniform Fire Code. And it is only way down in 17 and other places that we get into sprinklers at all. Right. So my concern is, and I think your answer, my concern is in amending 1720.030, we were taking, and on page 4, the specific section about the single family, we were taking out things which I think you're telling me are in the NFPA code so that it doesn't need to be in our city code. It's adopted by just by adopting the latest NFPA code.
A part of that, but for the single family dwellings, that's more under Chief Manasseh's authority there in the building code. Sprinklers actually fall in that. The portion of this that covers the sprinklers, which we're mandating beyond what's in the code, and that's to go back and retrofit these buildings on Main Street that currently aren't required under the code unless they get into certain renovations, which gets to a certain dollar amount or square footage, or they have a major fire and it's got to be brought up to code.
So my concern was that this legislation would limit your capability or planning and zoning's capability to do all the proper inspections, and you're saying not to worry, it's taken care of either by adopting the NFPA or processes that are over in planning and zoning inspections.
Yes, for the fire
that's
department,
good to hear.
Yeah, for the fire department, it's covered that way, and I think Chief Manasseh concurs with the building code.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Alderman Arnett, but I think the big question to ask is, with this as written, does it conflict in any way or inconsistent with Title 6 and Title 17?
You're absolutely correct. That is a question, because in Title 6, it does mention residential structures. And that's what first I thought, gee, are we being consistent in 17 with what we say in Title 6 on page 2. Yeah, page 2 of the ordinance down at line 38, where we're talking about, I'm not sure what a long-term residential structure is, but I would assume that either a single family structure or a duplex are long-term residential structures. And so that was what tickled my curiosity from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's a very important question. Would John Manassa, would you be able to answer that? Are we still intact on the inspections, et cetera, the code requirements in Title 6 and Title 17, or does this negate any of that?
I don't think it negates any of it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, the long-term residential structure, I think, is just inclusive language.
Okay. I believe Alderman Finlayson, you had a question? Or
No, my question was answered. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman O'Neill, did you have a question? No.
No questions. I understand the explanation. Thanks.
Okay. Revolving funds, I thought it would be prudent to ask because it's related to finance. Alderman Arnett questioned why we deleted the electrical assistance revolving fund. I guess my first question, Mr. City Manager, is to Director Dickinson on whether we have ever utilized that fund, albeit a good intentions. Has that fund ever been utilized? Director Dickinson.
Yeah, as far as I know, that fund was never created or utilized.
Oh,
so I don't know what so for instance, we have a sprinkler fund. We could manage other funds through there, but I've never heard anything about electrical program or anything like that. So I don't know if it was ever used. I can't say for sure if it was ever used or not. It could have been. But I can't see it in the system that I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the intent of this was assuming that we weren't going to have sprinklers, then we should rectify any sort of electrical hazard, and hence this fund. Is that hazard, the question is that hazard of the old electrical wiring enough to substantiate a fund, or has that, have we crossed that? Have we rectified that, or have the building owners rectified that? I don't know the status of that. It would have to come up in building inspections. John, are you able to speak to that at all as far as the electrical wiring in these buildings? Have they replaced them as part of your inspections? And
yes, whenever we have any type of permit activity and we do inspections, any defective wiring or wiring that is specifically knob and tube, we generally require that to be replaced while they're there. So I don't have a tally of where that's happened and where it hasn't happened, but it is a general practice that we make that requirement. And I don't think anybody's ever questioned funding it when they have that type of project. They've never approached us and looked for funding sources. Yeah,
I definitely believe the intent of the fund was very valid, but if you have not had any building owners questioning, the cost, et cetera. So, but Alderman Arnett, I know you were involved in this. You have a question?
And I'll also rely on Alderwoman Finlayson's memory as well, but this was a big push under Ellen Moyer when Alderwoman Finlayson and I first got on the council, because we wanted to see the second and third floors of historic buildings used. I still think that's a laudable goal. And there were two issues for them to be permitted for habitable space. One was that they would need to be sprinkled. The other was that the knob and tube wiring in these old buildings was a problem for things like laying down aluminum backed insulation or running air conditioning ductwork across the exposed wires of knob and tube. And like the sprinkler fund, it was meant to incent people to buy into the fund. Director Dickinson is correct. The fund never got established. We had a hard enough time getting the sprinkler fund off the ground, and it had sort of a checkered history. But my question as a policy question is, rather than remove it from the legislation, ought we not think about it as a fund that should be established, just like the sprinkler fund, to encourage people to come in to get help getting rid of knob and tube, as well as getting sprinkled so that they can use those second and third story buildings. And so it was, I know we're not doing it now, but rather than remove it, shouldn't we really have a push to establish it and put some money in the fund and make it known that it's available?
Director Dickinson and then Alderwoman Finlayson.
And I would ask you to consider whether or not the differences in the two loans would allow it to be in the same fund. So we could have a sprinkler and electrical assistance revolving fund.
Yeah, they were
so
always
that
meant
it's
to be
easier to
two.
manage. We could just change the title of the fund that I have and put the funding for both purposes into the same place.
Yeah, they were always intended to be two separate funds.
But what, excuse me, Alderwoman Finlayson, but what I understand, what John Manasseh explained is that this is coming up in the building inspections when they do renovations, and they have done this without using any funding from the city. So I would question why we would need it.
No,
but
you're correct, but this was intended to motivate people to come in and redo these spaces. Obviously, when they're already motivated to do it, they will be going through all the permitting processes. This was to encourage people to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, I think Ms. Dickinson answered my question, but I'm not sure. Is it possible to keep this, well, to create the sprinkler and electrical assistance revolving fund? Create one fund. We have the fund for the sprinkler already. We do not have the fund for electrical. So could we include electrical under the existing sprinkler fund?
But that's not
Ms. Dickinson, you kind of said no a minute ago. But is that doable? I mean, could we just simply create one fund for both? With different standards?
I think I was advocating for one fund, but what I would need, one, they're both being funded by the same funding source, general fund appropriations. If you want to put more money there to facilitate these loans, you'll have to take it out of the general fund. So the funding source is the same. It's just the question is, do you want those two pots of money in the same place? And if they're under the same section of the code and your intention is to save buildings from fire, you know, the risk of fire, then unless there's a legal reason why they would need to be separate, it's easier for us to manage them together. But there's, you know, I want to make sure that we're not sharing a funding source that would be conflicting where, you know, some of the money, the reasons why, or let me see, the rules behind the sprinklers are different than the electric, and therefore different properties would be considered, et cetera. But I don't see why we couldn't take the applications for both under the same fund and just decide at that time if there's funding left in the fund. But then you risk it running out of funding faster if you got two sources pulling from it. But I haven't seen an electrical application ever, and the sprinkler applications are few and far between. So I think this is meant to encourage more use of the fund.
Then I would think that maybe we could amend this legislation to include, to say sprinkler and electrical assistance revolving fund, and create one fund. And Mr. Manasseh has said it's not frequently an issue. No one's asked about funding, but they didn't ask about the sprinkler funds probably when we first started having horrific fires. So, you know, what is the harm of being prepared? And if Ms. Dickinson says we can put it in one fund, it's easier to manage. The directors know that it's available. It just seems like a easy fix to me.
And you would need to make sure the Office of Law agrees with that they can go in the same fund. There might be something else I'm not considering. From a management standpoint, it's easier to manage them in one fund.
Mr. Lyles?
Yes, ma'am. You had a question for us?
Yeah, is there something that would prohibit us from merging the sprinkler and the non-existing electrical assistance revolving fund into one fund?
Not that I know of right now, ma'am. I'd have to do a little more research in it. I think it's our money, and we can keep it's a fund that you established, so you can change it. It's not related to any state or federal mandate regarding these funds. So I think you have some flexibility here based on what I'm seeing in the code.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. As a sponsor of this legislation, let me put it this way: the sprinkler fund in and of itself is not enough to cover the 40 plus buildings that will need to be sprinkled. It's on a first come, first served basis. We prioritize them for building owners that intend on using it as residential or minority contractor language, et cetera. So I also, let me ask, John, from your purview survey, is this old electrical wiring a prevalent enough problem that would justify it being a dangerous situation that we should take initiative with, such as the sprinkler initiative? I don't want to put you on the spot, but it seems like it comes up when you do alterations and they're willing to change it out then.
Madam Chairwoman, I think this is, as stated earlier, an incentive program and an assistance program, but it's not an identification program. So many of the places that may have some existing knob and tube wiring, we might not know it exists in that location. And it may be that the building owner might not know that it truly exists. And so as an incentive program, it really doesn't necessarily call those out and make it easier to solve that problem. I think what we're dealing with here is, you know, there's a degree of unknown, and I can't quantify that, but I can say the problem does get smaller and smaller every year because sooner or later somebody touches that material and brings it into code compliance. So I really can't quantify how much is out there and where it's located and how hard it would be or how costly it would be to eradicate that section of wiring. I just don't have a feel for it.
Yeah. For that reason, I think it should be, if we do this, it should be addressed separately. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes. How many times, and I think we've already been told this, but how many times have we actually have people use the sprinkler fund? And I know of one person who's used it. It's not something that there's a mad rush to use it. This is a service that we're providing. And we've had, I believe, like I said, one person who's used that fund. So I don't think we should look at it as decreasing the availability of funds for sprinkling. I think it's just an added benefit to have this fund. Clearly, it was the intent of the previous council to have a fund, but it was never followed up on because it was never created. So I'm not seeing any harm. I'm not seeing any decrease of the value of the sprinkler program if we added electrical to it.
Well, I'll just respond to that. The difference is that this legislation is making it a law that the respective properties within a certain area are supposed to sprinkle their buildings within a 5-year period. So the city is actually telling them that this is what they need to do. And we are saying to entice them, for lack of a better word, we have this revolving fund specific to this request to make it more palatable. And as I said, there are 40-something properties that are now told they have to sprinkle their buildings. So I would prefer not to conflate this fund with another, what I see as an initiative to direct property owners to replace their wiring. That is a whole different thing and a whole different unknown. We can identify buildings that aren't sprinkled, but it's very difficult for us to identify buildings that have hidden wiring going back to, one would hope perhaps ideally if they, this is just a thought, that, if they do sprinkle, it is due to renovation, and they will do some subsequent renovation and that wiring will come up and will have to be replaced. So I number one, based on what John said, I think it's a tough thing to identify and to assign a number two. And number two, again, that is not the objective of this legislation.
May I, I'm not clear because my recommendation is that we create a joint fund. It does not mandate that any buildings have to redo their electrical. It only gives access to funds if that becomes necessary. So I'm not clear because it's not diluting the sprinkler opportunity at all. And it isn't requiring, or unless I'm reading this wrong, it doesn't require that electrical be done like we're requiring that sprinklers have to be done. Now, electrical may be a bypass of needing to do the sprinklers, but it doesn't mandate that they upgrade their electrical. I mean, unless I'm missing that. Okay, so I'm just talking about the revolving fund.
So what you're, I misunderstood. I thought you wanted to combine them.
Only the revolving fund. And I'm looking at page 6, line
why don't you
21.
So I'm confused. You want to have 2 revolving funds? Go back to the original language is what you're proposing?
No. That line 21 would read in essence, sprinkler and electrical assistance revolving fund, one fund. Okay. And adding it back likewise in line 24 and wherever else there's a strike through. So simply adding the electrical fund to the sprinkler fund, creating one fund for both as needed, as an opportunity, not as a requirement, as you're doing for your 40 buildings.
I'm not following the logic in that I believe that would take away from the sprinkler fund available to the respective property owners, unless I'm misunderstanding something. Help me with that.
How many people have access to sprinkler fund in the last any number of years?
They haven't used it. That's why we have this legislation.
That has been used.
There have been, I think
5. It's 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Three
So we
during my tenure, 3. There's another one I believe that's been applied for that was in process, but they may not have proceeded because I don't think it's come back from fire marshal. Yeah, there's process they have to do to review what they're doing, the work they're doing, and sign off on it before we loan them the funds. So anyways, maybe 4, 3, maybe 4.
Okay. So I think it's a misinterpretation to say that it would heavily drain the fund if we added electrical to it, when we haven't accessed to the greatest degree possible the sprinkler fund. So I'm just saying it just makes sense to merge them. Obviously you're not getting what I'm trying to do here, but it's your legislation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think we're addressing a problem that's already seen a solution. But Alderwoman O'Neill, let me have Chief Romali and then John Manasseh ahead of you, if you don't mind. Chief Romali.
So I just wanted to add in that both of those funds were set up at the same time. The Alderman is correct. It came after one of the major fires we had. We don't run into the issue until we find it during a fire investigation, at which point we get the electrical inspector very heavily involved. But both of those funds were set up. And just to go in what Jody was saying, the revolving fund's been there for quite a while for the sprinkler systems, and it hasn't been until the last couple of years that we've really seen anybody utilize it. And most of the people we've seen utilize it actually are single family dwellings that have been upgrading and doing renovations to their buildings. So we just need to remember also that this fund is not just for the businesses we're talking about downtown. It is a citywide project, and it can be used for single family dwellings. I just want to make sure we were all clear on that. Thanks.
Right, that valid point. Thank you. And John, did you want to add to that? John Manasseh?
Yeah, also the sense that sort of repeating what Chief Romali said is the funds and the need for them sometimes may go back 30 years to the sort of the earlier Main Street fires in the late 90s. A lot has changed since then. So just keep that in mind, that the problem from the late 90s is different from the problem today. A lot of that has been resolved. I don't really foresee the need for the electrical fund. However, at the same time, I don't think it hurts anything to have it, but that's my position on the matter.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
Thank you. So here's my 2-part question. 1, do we know how people find out about this fund? And 2, so if they don't know about it, maybe that's why it hasn't been used. But 2, if the purpose of this legislation is to enforce the fact that we are now requiring building owners to sprinkle, my guess is that if they also know about this fund, that the fund is going to be more widely used. And so then I would put in a vote to keep the fund as strictly sprinkle, and perhaps look at a separate fund, as was suggested earlier, for the electrical work. But if the purpose of the legislation is to require building owners, commercial building owners, to sprinkle their buildings, then I think that we need to leave that fund as sprinkler fund. And if in the process of them sprinkling their buildings, that's a funny word, I think, sprinkling. If they find that wiring is also an issue, as has been stated, that often happens, then it comes about. I think for the ease of this particular ordinance, we need to keep it simple and keep it to the sprinkler.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. At this point, I think we.
There's one left, which is in the current ordinance 1720-100 is entitled Plan Review and Fire Inspection Fees. that has disappeared. And this may be, again, another case where it is somehow picked up in the NFPA or some other place, but there was no explanation as to why it disappeared. And it did have a ring of being important to me, but my main question is, why did it go away?
I think that might be related to the question on how this relates to the other titles. John or Chief, are you able to answer that?
It's an awkward section. It reads, plan review to ensure compliance with applicable fire prevention codes, comma, and fire inspection fees shall be established by resolution by the city council. I mean, we know we have that power to establish fees. I guess the real question, I mean, the wording is awkward, but the real question is it picked up someplace else? Does it need to be picked up someplace else? And that may not be something we can answer right now in the interest of time. And you've given me a lot of it.
No, I think John can answer.
I think this is not changing our process or the way the code really is interpreted. For me, I interpret this to mean that fees are going to be established for plan review and inspections. And that's simply just cleaning up the wording of it so it reads cleaner.
Okay. Thank you.
You're cleaning it by eliminating it?
No, because I read this that it's saying that like you read, the fees for plan review to ensure compliance with the fire prevention code and for fire inspection shall be established by city council. To me, that reads very cleanly.
That's no longer in the code. That's being amended out. It's stricken.
In the version I'm looking at, the right after there, the word inspection is in all caps. So that means it's added there.
It's added.
It's been renumbered, I think. I think it's been renumbered because instead of being 100, it's 90 now.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Alderman Lisa.
Catch.
I see what you're saying. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And
I'm done.
That was my interpretation too, that they were just trying to clean that up. You know, you still every year go and review the fee schedule, and during the permit process and during our inspections, we still charge those fees and are able to do that.
All righty then. At this point, I'd entertain a motion for some action here from my colleagues on a favorable, unfavorable recommendation from the Finance Committee on 01-22. If anyone's willing to make a motion or not.
Make a motion to vote on it favorably.
I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and thank you, Alderman Arnett, for your review of this legislation.
Madam Chair, thank you for your time, committee.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last, well, time check, we're going to go over. I apologize. I don't like to do that, but that was a good discussion. Next is the resolution R34-21, which is the adding a cost for a fee for projects under $500, and we did our amendment from the last meetings are there. So why don't we take time, if you haven't, to look at the amendment and see if it meets what we discussed last meeting, a $25 fee. And if so, I think we can simply, I can ask for a motion to approve as amended. I mean, not approve, to recommend as amended.
Madam Chair, I'm trying to see, I know we added the $25. Did we reduce it from 100 to 25? I'm looking at the original, the legislation, and then going back to our amendment.
Okay, I'm looking at the amendment. I'm looking at the fee schedule. What are you looking at, Alderwoman Finlayson?
Well, the question is, I'm trying to remember what we did. Did we reduce the amount of the fee from 100 to $25, I think?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what was done.
Yeah, we thought because, between 0 and 500. Yeah, so that's what we did. Okay. Then I will recommend a favorable recommendation for R3421 as amended.
And I'll second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Good work by the committee.
You're done on time.
No, we do have an update from Director Dickinson if she has time.
I have time. It won't take long. Just to tell you, how busy we are here. Katie and I and the city manager are busy meeting with all the departments for the budget process for the 23 requests and working our way line by line through those requests. We've got meetings. We've been doing it for the last couple of weeks, and we got a week or so more of those first round meetings. We're also working on the union negotiations, which goes along with that budget process. And we've already started the meeting process there. Another thing that's taking a lot of time on the schedule is the Amrp P3 concession agreement. As you know, the various meetings we have, various groups and documents we're discussing, all in preparation for the final concession arrangement. And then the only other thing that's one of my priorities here is getting staffing completed. I've got three things we're trying to fill right now, and we have candidates for each, but hopefully my offers are successful and we get people in the door. You're muted.
Good luck.
My paper shuffling again. What are those three positions?
Procurement officer, an accountant, and a contractual budget analyst to come on board during budget to assist Katie.
If we don't have that third one filled, will we look at outsourcing for budget review, for budget compilation, or?
Not at this time. I don't, as far as outsourcing, I'd have to know where to outsource it to. And that looking would probably take more time than we have on the horizon for the budget process. We have until the end of March to get the document pulled together.
Okay. Do I have any questions for Director Dickinson? No? Okay. Can I have thank you, Director Dickinson. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
At
Motion to adjourn.
12:30.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Thank you very much. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you.